Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us today, and welcome to our second webinar focused on our two Smart Growth programs. My name is Stephanie Wojtowicz. I'm the Director of the Division of Planning here at the Department of State's Office of Planning, Development, and Community Infrastructure, and I'm joined today by Paul Beyer, who is the Director of our Smart Growth programs. We'll first talk about the Community Planning and Zoning program, followed by our County Resiliency Planning program. And within each program, we'll talk about some of the program-specific criteria, and then at the end, we'll go over some additional criteria that's relevant to both programs. A few housekeeping items to go over today. Attendees are muted, but you can ask questions in the chat section of the webinar. So on the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, you'll see the chat bubble. So just click on that and a box should come up and you can enter your question in the message area. Please just make sure that you click all panelists and that your question goes to all panelists. If we don't get to your question today, rest assured we're recording everything and we'll provide an answer in our formal Q&A, which will be posted on our website on July 7th. And then if you have additional questions that come to mind after the end of the webinar, you always have that opportunity to write in questions for the formal Q&A, and we'll provide that information at the end of our presentation today. Also, just note that we won't be able to answer specific questions about eligibility and whether or not you're eligible for a particular project or grant opportunity. Eligibility is not always straightforward, and it's really based on the information that's provided in the application itself. But please refer to the program RFA that's on our website that you'll see at the end of the presentation, for that specific eligibility criteria. And we ask that you read the request for applications very closely when it comes to eligibility. So I'm going to pass this over to Paul, and he's going to walk through our programs.
Thank you, Stephanie. I'm Paul Beyer. I'm the Director of Smart Growth at the Department of State's Office of Planning, Development, and Community Infrastructure, overseeing this program in coordination with Stephanie and others. The Smart Growth program generally attempts to incorporate the principles of smart growth into local planning, zoning, and development, which is what these two programs revolve around, but also into the operations of regional entities and state and federal government. It provides opportunities to municipalities for smart growth planning and zoning in a nutshell. Many of you may know some or all of these smart growth principles, but I'll run through them. Most of these are embedded in state law as well as our program RFA. The primary goal with smart growth is to create compact, mixed-use communities in targeted areas and provide a range of housing opportunities and choices. That would be housing sizes, housing incomes, housing design, and housing density. We try to attempt to develop and redevelop existing communities, what's often known as infill development. We attempt to achieve distinctive, attractive communities with a strong sense of place, something that you feel when you see a place and feel a sense of place. Density, I might add to that targeted density, well-planned density in the places where you want to grow and densify. Clean energy is a big part of the smart growth planning and zoning process for a very good reason. Energy has become distributed, it's become part of our community's infrastructure, and in many cases it requires planning and zoning on the local level. Clean energy is related directly to climate change. The state has set some very ambitious greenhouse gas reduction goals. Clean energy clearly fits into those goals. So we're with clean energy, we are attempting to meet these goals, but also to address a major policy initiative, not just here in New York, but worldwide. On that topic also, there's two branches, two prongs to climate change. One is reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and one is creating communities that are resilient to climate effects, like more frequent and severe storm events. The reverse of that would be drought and any other disaster related to climate and resiliency. Green infrastructure. Here at the Department of State's Office of Planning and Development, we prefer that communities consider green infrastructure options first over gray or hard infrastructure. Social diversity and integration is an important topic. Another way to put it is diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility and justice. It's very important at the office here, and we look for a social diversity element in these applications and plans. Regional planning and coordination is important. Even though the first program is based in municipalities, municipalities don't exist in a vacuum. So we encourage folks to include in their application how they have and intend to plan across municipal lines. Walkable, bikeable neighborhood design, that's probably one of the cores of smart growth. Variety of mobility choices, that would include transit and biking and walking paths. Well-planned and well-placed public spaces. By well-placed, we mean that they are accessible to people of all backgrounds and abilities. And community and stakeholder collaboration in the planning process. Community engagement is huge in the smart growth worldview. So first, the smart growth community planning and zoning program. To distinguish this from the Countywide program I'll speak to in a few moments, this program is focused entirely on individual municipalities, and we define that as villages, towns, and cities, whereas the other program focuses exclusively on counties. So the Smart Growth Comprehensive Plan is a very powerful tool. It is the foundational blueprint really for the future of your community, how it looks, how it feels, how it operates, and really how it's able to attract both residents and business investments. It has legal import because it will determine how you ultimately zone your community. It is a policy and legal document, and it's a very effective land use tool. It gets to the vision for the community. Not very often does a municipality have an opportunity to establish a vision for its community, what the community members want, what they like, what they want to see in the future. It is, as I said, the foundation for development decisions, decision-making on many levels, and it achieves both short and long-term goals. Municipalities are encouraged to develop and update their comprehensive plans, which, as I mentioned, share a vision for the community. And on that note, I will just emphasize that we fund both updates to existing plans, particularly plans that are very outdated, and we also fund plans and communities that have never had a comp plan. There are multiple benefits to comprehensive planning. I just completed as a volunteer a plan in the town that I live in, Bethlehem, New York, and I was able to see firsthand from the bottom up, not just the top down as a grant administrator, those benefits in real personal terms. It'll help you to identify your important community resources. We don't often get a chance to inventory our resources. It develops community consensus. It's a rough process. Sometimes there are a variety of opinions across the entire spectrum, but in the end, they will help bring those different perspectives into some form of consensus for the future. And as I mentioned earlier, it really is a blueprint. Think of this as a blueprint, just like you do a blueprint for a building or a house. It sets the stage for the decisions that are going to be made to build your community in the future. We not only fund comprehensive plans, comprehensive because they cover the entire municipality, but last year we added an additional eligible activity, which is area planning. It's a land use tool for a specific area. It focuses on an important priority areas for the community, and just a few examples would be transit-oriented development. Many communities want to just carve out like a half-mile radius around their bus or rail transit and focus attention and planning and development and then zoning in those areas. Brownfield opportunity areas, we have 70 designated what we call BOAs throughout the state. They are priority focus areas for us. We oversee that program. Downtowns, clearly. Hamlets, sometimes the hamlet is your downtown, particularly in some rural areas. And central business districts and main streets. Could also extend into former industrial areas that you might want to redevelop or other corridors. So we included area planning in this solicitation. They're less time consuming, less expensive. Sometimes they can even jumpstart a broader comp plan process. Next slide. Now for both comp planning and area planning, we have follow-up resources available and eligible activities to zone to take the next step when you do your comprehensive plan. Your zoning ordinance by law must be consistent with your planning, both your area plan and or your comp plan. So this is where the blueprint gets translated into actual legal language, zoning. What can be built where and at what density. It's another important land use tool. It's the final step in the process. It implements the vision that you've established through your comp or area plan. It is a legal document. It is the foundation for future decision making that your municipal boards and planning boards will consider, adhere to when reviewing individual development projects. It's a great deal of certainty to residents and developers and municipal officials. Developers will tell you that they want and desire first and foremost some degree of certainty and consistency so they know what they're investing in. Eligible applicants, I'll review again here, are villages, towns, or cities, what we refer to as municipalities. Now, counties, regional planning entities, and not-for-profits can apply for and administer these grants, but it must be on behalf of the village, town, or city. The planning and zoning must take place in those municipalities. And these entities must get the consent of the village, town, or city on whose behalf they are applying and administering the grant. They get it in the form of a resolution that the municipality agrees to partner with the county regional planning entity or not-for-profit. That's very important because some communities, specifically smaller, maybe rural, under-resourced, understaffed communities, might not be able to administer a grant and do a comp plan, so we have entities out there that are skilled in this practice.
Paul, can I just add to this that for a nonprofit, they have to be incorporated under the nonprofit corporation law and be approved for tax exempt status by December 31st of 2022 for them to be eligible for this as well.
Okay, thank you for that. Make sure that if you're approaching a not-for-profit. Next, eligible activities for community planning and zoning. Of course, preparing the plan and or zoning ordinance. Community engagement is a big chunk of the activities and the expenditures, holding and facilitating community forums and doing public outreach in many different forms. Coordinating with other governmental entities. Remember I mentioned regional and intergovernmental coordination before? That's important. We also will fund your environmental review, known as SEQR, State Environmental Quality Review Act review, and the management of the project, the kind of bare bones management of funding these activities. So here we get down to the nitty gritty of the criteria that we use and that you must address with specificity. We recommend in the evaluation of your grant, the development of the grants, and our evaluation and scoring of your grant applications. So we'll start at the top, the demonstration of need and economic distress. As I mentioned earlier, planning and zoning can really be a tool to advance economic development, particularly in distressed areas. So you can get up to 2 points for that. Demonstration of a smart growth commitment. Again, I'm going to repeat the importance of specificity. What have you done already to move yourself in the direction of smart growth, adopting smart growth principles? Sometimes we see communities that will represent that they've started the process by doing a sidewalk plan or an open space preservation plan. Show us what you've done, and that would fit into the scoring criteria. Public engagement and commitment. That is your display to us that this will be a bottom-up community, the community-driven plan or zoning ordinances. The next category is probably the most important and definitely requires the most thought and specificity, and that's the integration of smart growth principles. Here, demonstrate to us, again, what you have done that would connect to smart growth. In its many manifestations, you have all the principles there. Show us what you've done, and then tell us what you plan to do in the future with specificity again. The scope of work is really important. When we get down to the end here, the next big category of evaluating your budget, we have to see if you can actually accomplish this scope. So, you can be ambitious with your scope, but don't be overly ambitious, and make sure that the amount of money that you're requesting is enough to achieve that scope. That leads us right to the time frame. We need to know that you will be able to complete the plan timely within the scope and within the budget. What is your local capacity? Dig deep on this one. Think about some of the committees and subcommittees and activities, educational events that you've done already that show that you have the capacity to bring people together and achieve consensus and develop a plan. And then the evaluation of budget and cost, once again, specificity. We have to determine whether you can do this accomplish these goals within a specific budget. So look very closely at those criteria, because we do when we grade them. You want to do it?
So to follow up on what Paul was talking about, that section of integration of smart growth principles, we have a separate slide on this just to hone it in a little bit more, that this is worth 36 points. So this year, each principal will receive 3 points each. So there'll be separate questions in the application targeting each smart growth principle. So we want to see how each principle will be integrated into the planning process, show us how the principle is applicable to your community. And this is really where you get to tell us, your story and what's unique about your community and how these principles apply to your community. And we also, we understand that not all principles will apply to each community. So if there are 1 or 2 that don't apply, make sure you just tell us why. Tell us, why a particular principle may not be relevant or feasible for your community. But give us an explanation so that we can understand, that you've considered that principle, but realize that it may not be feasible or appropriate or relevant in your community. So this year, again, it will be separate questions to address each one of those principles, which is a little bit different from last year.
Yes, and I just want to play off one word that Stephanie used, and that's story. This is the part of the application that is less prescribed and bureaucratic and more narrative. Every community has a story, so tell us, for example, if you've always wanted to revitalize that Four Corners, that hamlet, and you've taken steps toward that goal, that's a specific condition. You've always wanted to redevelop that vacant, industrial complex, and you think that planning and zoning will advance that. Tell us about those specific conditions in your community and why. And once again, just to punctuate what Stephanie said, if a principle is not relevant, don't just state not relevant, explain why. And we will certainly consider that. Not all of these principles apply to every single community. So that's the planning and zoning component of this two-pronged approach that we take. The next program is the Countywide Resiliency Planning Program, and as the name implies, this is planning around climate resiliency on a countywide level. Before I get into the plans themselves, let me give you a little bit of background. This is round 2 of this program. We tried this a few years ago with a set of 5 counties that are completing their plans right now. We wanted to test it out and see if there was a need. This program, as well as the planning and zoning program, were very much oversubscribed, almost threefold oversubscribed. So they're very competitive. Going through this countywide resiliency planning process in those 5 counties helped us inform this next round, this round 2. We have $2 million available to do more plans. First round was very successful, and again, I think it helped us inform this next round. What we're trying to address here is the climate change risks and vulnerabilities associated with a number of hazards and vulnerabilities, and increased frequency and severity of storm and rain precipitation events. We've witnessed that. We all know that. Sea level rise, we know that's happening on the coastal tidal areas of the state. Storm surge. Storm surge was one of the major issues of Superstorm Sandy on Long Island in New York City. Drought, as I mentioned earlier, we've asked to include drought because that is another important climate-related hazard that can cause tremendous damage, personal and business. Extreme heat has become a priority for the governor. We're developing an extreme heat plan right now, so that's a climate-related resiliency topic you could address. And others. We were fairly open-ended with whatever hazard your particular county has identified and wants to address. So convince us that there are other hazards and vulnerabilities and risks out there that we may not have covered in this solicitation. These resiliency plans will accomplish a number of goals. They include both adaptation and mitigation strategies, so keep that in mind. They're both connected, as I mentioned earlier. They advance and preserve natural landscapes. Again, as I mentioned earlier, our preference is to use the natural landscape, what we call natural and nature-based solutions in addressing storm resiliency and climate resiliency. Accessibility to green public spaces, very important. Again, it fits into that emphasis on natural solutions. Climate adaptive approaches. Tell us some of the specific approaches you want to take to adapt, and ensure that your evaluations and your applications are based on science, and that your decision making will be based on real science. Now, to help you, our office here has been developing a burgeoning climate resiliency unit, focusing on outreach and education around climate resiliency. So as a quick at-a-glance tool, we've developed what you see on this slide, what we call the resiliency principles. We have this poster up in our office to remind us of the myriad manifestations of climate resiliency. So we would encourage you to use these principles. We also have these posted on our website, dos.ny.gov. Just go to Community Infrastructure and Resiliency Planning and you could find these. We also have a set of model local laws for resiliency that may also inform your application if you're looking to alter, and we encourage you to alter and amend your local laws and policies to comport with the plans that you're developing. Eligible applicants here, again, the counties. These have to be countywide plans. There's no option here for area-specific plans. Regional planning councils in New York, very important tool, very important entities that we rely on often here at the Planning and Development Office, can apply on your behalf. They're skilled, as the name implies. They specialize in planning and zoning. So if you'd like, you can consult your regional planning council. They cover most of the state, but not all. And once again, as was the case with planning and zoning, eligible not-for-profits can apply on behalf of a county. Eligible activities, many. Surveys, assessments, research-oriented activities. We have encouraged scenario planning, different scenarios. Often they will be scenario 1, do nothing. Scenario 2, take certain moderate steps. Scenario 3, take very ambitious steps to address climate resiliency. We've also found that scenario planning is a very effective public education tool. It can show the community in very real terms what we mean by resiliency and why we need to plan for resiliency. Resiliency and risk assessments. The DOS has developed its own risk assessment tool. You can run through a number of criteria and data and really just evaluate your risks fairly precisely. And that's the foundation because, of course, you're addressing risks and vulnerabilities and hazards within your particular county. The activities, of course, writing the plan, editing the plan, holding community forums. Again, you've heard this before. We just recently wrapped up a plan in Genesee County, and even after the plan was done, we did a community event, a press event that got a lot of coverage, and we think was very educational for the community, particularly in taking the next steps. When you're done with a plan, you want to think about implementation. We call it the Plan Then Act strategy. So we encourage and try to help folks to think in terms of projects, identified projects that can be implemented with future funding. And again, here coordinating with myriad governmental entities, this type of collaboration is very effective, and we would encourage you to include all manifestations of that type of coordination in your application. So here's what you will see on our website, as I mentioned earlier. More precisely, dos.ny.gov/resiliency-planning. There are a number of resources. Please take a look at these because we include the model local laws and the resiliency principles, but it can also give you a broader view of what our agency's activities and priorities and goals are. And here we get back to the all-important scoring of your applications. Very similar to the planning and zoning program, public engagement is key. Please emphasize how you are going to represent your community when you develop your plan. Partnerships and commitment, they could be intergovernmental, they could be regional, they could be public-private, but look deep at some of the partnerships that you have developed and will develop. in the development of these plans. The scope of the work, again, make it realistic. Be ambitious, but don't be too ambitious. Same with the time frame. Can you achieve that scope within this time frame, and are you ready basically to hit the ground running and complete your plan within the scope and the time frame? Display the need for resiliency planning. Of course, what are some weather events, extreme weather events and hazards and disasters that you have already encountered, but also be proactive in thinking about what other hazards you may address in the future, or that maybe neighboring counties have had to address and you believe are applicable to your county. Your planning and implementation efforts, I think that speaks for itself. How will you undertake this process? Local capacity, show us again, if you can, in real terms, what you've already done as a community. That will demonstrate that you can come together, reach consensus, and plan effectively. What are some, in that category too, the next step would be complementary programs. What are some complementary programs that will feed into your resiliency planning efforts? And finally, once again, the all-important subject, 20 points, is your budget. Be specific, be realistic, and make sure that the budget reflects the time frame and the scope of work that you're presenting.
So Paul, you did a great job on covering these slides. This slide, I don't know if we need to go through the ones that get into more detail. So we have a couple of slides here that get into a little bit more detail on some of these categories. For example, the need for resiliency planning. So under this category, we're really asking you to provide a description of what your current and potential climate risks are, what your vulnerabilities exist throughout the county, what are some of your vulnerable populations, is there infrastructure that's currently at risk, what emergency services exist that are at risk, and then also natural resources, what natural resources are vulnerable to climate risks and which can benefit to help to be resilient to climate change. Also explaining damages that you've experienced and what your impacts your priority assets. The planning and implementation efforts, as Paul said, that's 6 points. So really tell us about your past and current planning efforts, what strategies have already been identified, what types of things are you already thinking about, and then also what are the things that you've already implemented. And how has the risk shifted because of that implementation? What reductions do you hope to see in the future? So what are those things that you are planning to do, and what are the things that you have done that has shifted risk? Paul has mentioned a number of times public engagement and commitment, and you can see here it's a maximum of 15 points for the smart growth community planning and zoning, and then 12 points for the countywide resiliency. So, we're really wanting communities to prepare a public participation plan, and grantees that receive funding for planning projects are required, in fact, to prepare a public participation plan that really aims at engaging a diverse cross-section of the community and stakeholders. So that will be developed. So, think about what that means to you. Describe that approach that you're going to take to ensure that you have ongoing participation. Describe how that engagement will address diversity, equity, inclusion, justice, and accessibility. And that can include, everyone in terms of diversity of income, diversity of age, education. So really trying to think across the population. Paul also mentioned the scope of work. This is 18 points. And this is really where you're telling us what you're going to be doing. What are you going to do? How are you going to do it? Who is going to be doing it? Really describe the tasks that you will be doing and really identify clear and distinct tasks. Explain to us what preliminary work you've done. Have you started planning already? Have you considered who's going to be on your committees? Have you done that upfront work? And we've provided a resource on the RFA website that includes a comprehensive planning and a zoning work plan. That's a general work plan that we've provided that communities can use to help shape the tasks moving forward. And while we're using it as a reference and a resource, we're really looking for you to provide your own details specific to the community. So you can use that as a resource as to what we're looking at in terms of the planning process for the smart growth and community planning and zoning, but really make it your own as well. And then again, the budget, there it goes. A maximum of 24 points for the community planning and 20 points for the countywide. So this is a big chunk of the points clearly and completely justify the funding amount that you're asking for. The sources of local resources into the budget, explain how the budget was determined, how you identified the estimates, make sure that you address all of the questions in that section. And then also throughout the whole application, and especially here in the budget question, you'll see question requirements linked after every question. Make sure you click on that because it will provide you more information about how to answer that question. Good.
Yeah, thanks so much, Stephanie. This is so important to get precise here, and also in that one section I mentioned, the principles, your story, your background, your narrative, to drill in on a couple of specific items that will help your scoring if you achieve them. We provide extra points, bonus points for lack of a better term, if you've achieved certain community certifications or designations. One of them being Climate Smart Community designation from certification, I should say, from the Department of Environmental Conservation. That'll get you a couple extra points. Shifting over to the energy side, if you're a clean energy community designated by NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, you'll get recognition and points there. And thirdly, if you're a community that's certified within the AARP network of livable, age-friendly communities, that's another bonus for you. These are three priorities for the state that we want to emphasize. Clearly, climate, energy within climate, and whether or not you can address, you have taken steps toward age-friendly community certification, ties directly to important state policy priorities, directives, laws, and plans.
Great. So the request for applications that we've mentioned a number of times is at this website here. If you go to dos.ny.gov, there's a funding and bidding page. Just click on that, scroll down. You'll see all of the opportunities, including these two programs, the local waterfront revitalization program, the brownfield opportunity area, and then our local government efficiency programs as well. So, it's really recommended that applicants read the RFA thoroughly, really look at the details within that RFA, and within, again, the application itself, click on those question requirements for more information. There's also a number of other resources that are also included on these pages as well. So I mentioned questions at the beginning. Questions must be submitted in writing to opd@dos.ny.gov, or you can send it by snail mail to the address here. We will not be able to answer questions that are submitted any other way, through social media, through the phone, any other way, but in writing. Those will be accepted, and through, I don't have the date here. I believe it's June 16th with the posting of the answers on July 7th. When you submit your questions in the email, make sure you indicate in the subject the RFA number. So if you're referring to the community planning and zoning, it would be 23-OPD-SG-3. It's written at the top of this slide. And then Countywide Resiliency is 23 OPD-SG-13. And when you ask your question, please be as specific as you can in the body of the email as to what page you're referring to in the RFA that you have a question about. That will just help us narrow into the language that you have a question about. So we have a few minutes for questions, and I'm going to scroll through the chat and see what questions we have and see if we can answer them. So first question is, when submitting an application on behalf of the municipality, is a public benefit corporation considered a not-for-profit? So I don't have a specific answer to that right now, but what I would suggest is that you go into the RFA itself. It will define what a not-for-profit is. And it should be right there in the RFA. I don't have that in front of me right now. So just make sure you check there. And as long as they meet that definition, then they would be eligible for the two programs.
Yes, we'll get a more precise legal answer back to you. But I think Stephanie really hit on the salient point. Check their status. As one example, a land bank in the state, they do vacant property acquisition and redevelopment, applied last year. That's a not-for-profit. They're listed right out in state business corporation law. But please check and inquire into the corporation that you're considering.
Yes, and that reminds me, Paul, the answers to these questions also will be posted.
Correct.
On that July 7th date with full answers. Are debrief/scores available for unsuccessful 2022 applications? Unfortunately, the time for debriefings has now closed on past applications, so we're unable to do a debrief on those applications. Will this slide deck presentation be emailed to us? It will not be emailed to the attendees, but it will be posted on the funding and bidding page. So once we get the recording all set, and we will get those posted to the RFA pages on our website. Next question, we are starting the process to begin a comprehensive plan within 2023 by creating a committee and working on an RFP for consultants. Should we be awarded a grant, would those costs incurred before award be eligible for coverage? So yes, if the costs are incurred after April 1st of 2023. So we are able, if an award is made, to backdate a contract to capture incurred costs, but we can only go back to April 1st of 2023. And those costs have to be eligible costs. They have to be related, specifically related to the project, and follow all of those requirements for the budget and for reimbursement. Related to that, are there any requirements for committee membership or resolution wording that we should be aware of? So we don't have strict requirements on committee membership, but we do have recommendations. We want to make sure that your committees are inclusive of the broad range of your population, and you're including everyone that has a stake in your project. So, you want to make sure that you're including, all your stakeholders and all appropriate members. So we do have, if you go on our website to the LWRP page, actually, you'll find some resources in terms of committee membership that would be applicable to the smart growth programs as well. And we don't have specific language on resolutions. I don't think we have a draft posted, but while we can backdate, I would, there are contract requirements that you also would need to make sure that you follow in order to be reimbursed. So we do caution people to starting too early, so that we can make sure that you're following all of the requirements, both in terms of the planning process, but also the reimbursement and contract process. So just keep that in mind as you're working through. But always good to think forward. Is there any opportunity for feedback on a draft application? Unfortunately, no, we cannot provide comment on a draft application. Will there be another opportunity this year for a comprehensive grant within New York State? In reviewing the RFA, many of the smart growth principles in Section 5, this specific community will be scoring extremely low given geography and demographic makeup. So we don't typically have 2 grant cycles within a year. But I would also, look to those smart growth principles, because you'd be surprised as you look at them and think about how they can be applied to your community, thinking outside the box, how many will really could apply to a community. I don't know, Paul, if you have any thoughts
again,
on that.
It's not boilerplate here, and as I said earlier, some of these principles will not apply to some communities. Just explain why with specificity, and then drill in again with specificity on the ones that do. We understand that it's not cookie cutter. There's just a diversity of communities out there, not just broken down by rural, urban, and suburban, but every community has some unique characteristic that may make a smart growth principle irrelevant, or just not so much irrelevant, but not applicable to your situation.
Okay, so I just noticed that our time, and we have gone over a little bit. If we did not get to your question, rest assured we're recording this and we'll get to them in our written questions. But we really appreciate you taking the time to stick with us today, and good luck with your applications. Please make sure to read that request for applications closely. And again, if you do have questions that come up as you're starting to work on your application and you'd like to submit them, just make sure you do that at the email on the screen. So thank you, everyone. Appreciate your time, and have a wonderful rest of your day and your week. Thank you.